the great soldiers of the US are its entrepreneurs. I'm paraphrasing Nassim Taleb. I don't remember the exact quote, but he said something along those lines that the real weapon the US has in contest of world dominance and challenging other big powers, it's not the army, it's not its military, it's the army of entrepreneurs that are constantly ready to challenge the status quo and drive progress, innovation, and technology. That is the real weapon the US has. While individual entrepreneurs mostly fail and sometimes, lose their heads, as a collective, they are an unbeatable weapon. This is the topic of today. Before that, I want to go as usual with the updates. This is the Not Even Wrong podcast. It's July 2nd, 2020. I'm Krim Delko. Today, we're up since the last update, July 1st, we're up 10.5%. The market is up 0.5%, so we're gaining 10% in outperformance. We are now up 95.5%. The market is down 3%, so we're outperforming by 98%. Since the numbers are so big, I want to give a little bit of perspective. So if we started with $100 and the S&P started with $100 on January 1st, 2020, today we have $198, while the S&P would have $97. So this is what these numbers mean. Now let's get back to the topic. I just finished reading Skunk Works. It's a book. It's a memoir by Ben Rich, an engineer at Lockheed Martin. Skunk Works is a division within Lockheed Martin, and they make very sophisticated aerospace weaponry, i.e., fighter jets, spy planes, things like that, for the U.S. Air Force. So the book is about how that works, how they develop these technologies. It's a great insight into how the process works from a technological perspective, and also from a political perspective, political, commercial, like all these aspects. And before I go a little bit deeper into the book, it's a very good book. It's a technological narrative about real things happening in the world. So it's maybe not the most literary or creative work I've ever read, but it's one of those things where you just see reality in front of you, and you learn great things about how things work. So I have two big conclusions from the book, and I want to talk about both of them, but particularly one of them. So one conclusion is a very simple one, which is great technology can be done. For example, there's a story in the book where they come up with the idea to build a very high flying, super fast spy plane that can take pictures from about 100,000 feet. And we're talking 60s, 70s type time frame. Technologically, that was considered pretty much impossible. And they did it. And it just shows that once you put enough brain power and muscle and money and will behind something, you can get things done. The other story of the book, which is less optimistic, but even more insightful, is, and I would phrase it as, it shows you how empires fail. And let me elaborate. What happens is that we have World War II, the U.S. wins, and the military complex becomes big, exactly like President Eisenhower predicted in one of those famous speeches. And then what happens is that you see this pigeonholing, and excuse me for that word, it's probably not a proper English word, but the U.S. military puts itself in a position, I think, because of its culture, because of the dominance, because of some human aspects, macho culture, generals trying to be the alpha male within a group of alpha males, and all that stuff, pigeonholes itself into a situation where they keep spending and spending for more and more sophisticated technology, while the actual efficacy on the ground is becoming less and less. What I mean with that is that, yeah, you have very expensive, highly sophisticated airplanes, but you can't win a war against Vietnam. You have a lot of issues in other areas, and most recently in the Middle East. So you have this disruption which is coming from left and right, and you're not able to deal with it because you're focused on the big picture that maybe in the 40s and 50s and 60s was still fine, but then slowly started deteriorating. And I think this is a good tale of why empires fail, because it's borrowing from Clayton Christensen's The Innovator's Dilemma, and I'm just using this argument for government and for the military competition, that you can be the alpha male or the alpha animal within the complex of military powers, and you can still fail because you lack the adjustment and the humility to adjust to new disruptive forces, and you keep spending billions of dollars on very highly sophisticated technology that is probably not very efficient. That's the other tale. And as a conclusion, though, I want to say, fortunately, and this is now the arc to Orange Capital Partners, and why do I even care about these things? Well, of course, our largest position is Tesla. Tesla has contributed to the 95% outperformance this year by far. We made some money with CRISPR also, and some money with Microsoft, but the main bulk comes from Tesla. And Tesla and SpaceX are both examples of ingenuity, entrepreneurship, hard driving, efficiency loving, customer centric entrepreneurship where capital is deployed for real innovation and real value. I don't want to diminish what Skunk Works did, but what Skunk Works did, partly because they could, was, well, they were spending a lot of money on very high end stuff. But the real ingenuity is to do the whole thing in a cost efficient way. This is real progress, and it's adaptive, it's flexible, it's and it assures progress. And I think the real weapon that the US still has is this army of entrepreneurs that as a collective always come up with something new, dramatic, progressive. Even though individually a lot of people fail, most people fail. Entrepreneurship is tough. It can ruin your life. So it's really, it is a war that everybody fights because, of course, the payoff is huge if you win. But I just want to state that here, that as a collective, entrepreneurship is unbelievably progressive for society. Individually, it's a very risky proposition. And that's why I think the weapon that the US still has to its disposal is the flexibility of the US economy. It's the ability to adjust to new situations that is given by its army of entrepreneurs. And if I look at Skunk Works, I must say that although their technological achievements were amazing, let's say commercial aerospace has been stagnating for decades. You know, flying from San Francisco to Singapore, it takes a long time and is very expensive, either monetary wise or it's unbelievably uncomfortable if you don't want to pay that much. But it's still very expensive. There's another startup, Boom Supersonic, which I think is following the textbook of SpaceX. I don't know a lot about them, but they seem to me a very capable startup that has that potential to disrupt the commercial aerospace market with supersonic aircraft. Why don't we have supersonic aircraft now when we actually had it in the 60s or 70s, according to Skunk Works? Well, because they cost so much money. It was so extremely expensive to build these things. And they were built for the most special use case for the Air Force or the CIA or the National Security Agency. They weren't built with the entrepreneur in mind that has to drive down costs and drive up efficiency. And I think that's unfortunate to the extent that if you have these types of large spending government entities, they actually even crowd out ingenuity, because a lot of talented engineers end up working for these mammoth projects, build trophy assets that are not very useful for the rest of society, and mostly not even useful for the army. because, like I said, unfortunately, the U.S. military has had some serious setbacks. Yes, the U.S. is still the dominant military power in the world, but compared to the power of its economy, the power of the U.S. dollar and the Fed, actually the army is relatively diminished. I would say the Chinese, they have a lot more respect for U.S. entrepreneurship than they have for the U.S. Army. And this is just me now saying out loud a thought. I can't prove that, but I would think that the fact that the Chinese are not able to catch up with U.S. ingenuity and U.S. progress has nothing to do with money, has nothing to do with policy, has nothing to do with none of these things. It's simply that our system of Silicon Valley style capitalism, where entrepreneurs start tinkering in their garages, get some angel money, get some Series A, B, etc., and slowly work themselves towards large companies and disrupt whole industries. This ability to do that, I think, is very unique to the United States. The Chinese are definitely the closest in this race, but they're still very far away. And I think this is the weapon that we have. And I think, to summarize, the book Skunk Works is highly recommended for several reasons. It is a nice book to understand how technology is developed, but I think it's also very important from an economics, financial markets, investor perspective, because it shows you how disruption works, how new startups can make a big difference even in highly regulated, highly organized spaces, such as, for example, supersonic flight or space exploration, because the incumbents are very rigid. They lack the ability to adapt, and they don't have incentives to adapt, while the entrepreneurs have all the incentives in the world. So kudos for SpaceX and Boom and all the other startups out there. As investors, like I said many times, our purpose is to generate wealth by investing in disruptive technology with large impact, and those companies are a very good example of what we're talking about. Thank you.